Well, welcome to the panel on the race to save women's sports. And we know here in Texas, it seems like a marathon to save women's sports. As we spent 3 sessions last year protecting female sports at the high school level. And like our president, Jonathan, said, we're still trying to protect all sports from biological males entering into that field and stealing those champions. But today, we have a great panel of great speakers, and I'm so excited about the conversation we're having today. First, we're having Kim Jones, who is the founder of Icons, which is an organization that protects female sports. If you can come to the stage as I call your name. She's also the mother of an Ivy League swimmer that competed last season against Leah Thomas. And after witnessing firsthand the coercion, abuse, and humiliation and abandonment of female swimmers, she decided to speak out about that experience. Next, we have Mr. Craig DeRoche, who is the president and CEO of Family Policy Alliance. Craig has nearly 30 years of experience advancing the dignity and worth of all human life, religious freedom, and family values in public policy. His organization, Family Policy Alliance, serves as the national leader in advocating for faith, family, and pro-life issues. And Mr. DeRoche and his national team helped Texas Values last year, which are HB 25 legislation that protects girls' sports in middle school and high school. And last but not least, I am very excited to have this last speaker, Riley Gaines. And if you don't know who Riley Gaines is, you might have been under a rock. But Riley Gaines just recently graduated from the University of Kentucky, where she is a swimmer. She finished her career as a NCAA All-American and 5-time SEC champion. But most important, after seeing and dealing with the effects firsthand by having to give her trophy to Mr. Leah Thomas, she has become outspoken on why biological males competing against females is unfair and wrong on so many levels. Well, thank you so much. And if you're familiar with this issue, it's an issue happening all across the United States, where we're seeing a lot of biological males under the guise of gender identity competing in female sports, taking away those spots for female athletes. And if you were at our conference last year, we talked about this issue and we talked about legislation. But with this panel, it's a little more special. We're talking about the real stories and the real effects of having these biological males basically rewrite Title IX in their own way and taking away the right to females competing. Now, I wanted to start with Riley Gaines because you have a very interesting, compelling story, and you witnessed this injustice firsthand. So tell us about your story and how you got involved.
Right, so like she said, I just graduated from the University of Kentucky, where I swam all 4 years. My college experience was interesting to say the least, of course with this issue, but we also had to deal with all the COVID stuff going on. And so going into my sophomore year NCAAs, our championship meet got canceled 3 days before we left. And so you spent all year training and working, well, your whole life, but really that past year working towards something that got canceled. So we all got sent home, which is really rare in swimming. So I spent my time at home with no pools open. I was swimming in a lake in a wetsuit every single day. And I had set my goals right then and there that when I came back, I wanted to be a national champion my junior year. We came back, things were going great, and I did really well, but I didn't accomplish that goal. And so my senior year, I told myself, this is my year, I'm going to do this. Things were going great. I was ranked, I believe, 3rd in the country. And then all of a sudden, there's this person who is ranked above me and the other female athletes by seconds, which seconds in swimming is a lot. And so I'm sitting there looking at this and I'm like, who is this person? They're a senior from a university that's not typically known for producing fast swimmers. And I was just kind of like confused, to say the least. And a couple days later, an article was released disclosing that Leah Thomas, which was the fastest woman in the country at this point in time, was formerly Will Thomas, who swam 3 years on the men's side at UPenn. And honestly, when I heard that, I was relieved because I thought, makes sense, There's a reason why this person is so much faster than every other girl in the country. And I truly felt like a weight was off my shoulders and I wasn't being threatened in a sense for that national title spot that I had set to, that goal I set to reach. And so the NCAA was back and forth all the way up until we competed in March, about 2 weeks before they finally said, Thomas will be competing with the females. And I was just baffled. I truly thought this would never happen, but of course that did. Thomas, that first day, won a national title in the 500 freestyle, beating out the fastest females in this country, American record holders, Olympians, with, of course, only spending 5% of their life as a female. That next day, we swam and we tied, which is pretty rare to do in swimming, to go the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. And so upon tying, you go behind the awards podium where they distribute out the trophies, and they kind of march you out. And so we went back there, and the NCAA official looked at me and said, great swim. We don't really account for ties. We only have one trophy. We are going to give this trophy to Thomas. Yours will eventually come in the mail. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm understanding there's only one. Ties are rare. But I ask him, I'm like, why are you adamant on giving this trophy to Thomas? And he looks at me and says, oh, well, we're just doing this in chronological order. And so I further question him and I say, what are you being chronological about? Maybe I'm just not understanding something. And he told me for photo purposes, Thomas had to hold the trophy, and mine would eventually come in the mail. And so it was at this point that I realized, not only were we being forced to compete against biological men and change in a locker room with biological men, we were being sidelined to men. We were being totally put on the back burner. 50 years of what Title IX had worked to, enforce in women's athletics, it was totally reversed. And so I was sick of waiting for someone, a coach, an athletic director, someone with some political power to stand up for us women and say something. And I realized that it had to come from a woman who had experience.
Wow, that's amazing. And thank you for being so bold. I still can't get over the fact that you tied and it's a woman's sport, but they gave a biological male the trophy.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of in that same boat, and it's been something that the media hasn't done a great job of covering, and I think that says a lot too about how the media works and what they want, society to think.
Wow, absolutely. Now, Kim, you have a similar story. You're the founder of an organization that has the sole purpose of combating the invasion of gender identity in female sports. Now, tell us your story of how you got involved in the fight to save women's sports and what the ICONS, Independent Council of Women's Sports, actually does to help this issue.
Thank you. This isn't working. Thank you. So our sole purpose isn't actually to combat gender identity, but that absolutely has to be step number one. Our purpose is to elevate and empower female athletes and to promote women's sports, to take a leadership role in giving women a collective voice and an advocacy group on their behalf. Step number one, though, absolutely does have to be to combat this issue, because without women's sports being for the female athlete, there is no women's sports. There is no sportsmanship. There is no true victor. There is no celebrating of the physical limits of what women are capable of. So, thank you. I noticed this, or the need for it, as this year went on. I am also a former competitive athlete. I played tennis and loved my experience as an athlete. It gave me a lot of opportunities, opened a lot of doors, and I strongly encouraged my 4 children to pursue athletics, as I would any young woman I would come across. I think it's a wonderful way to develop a relationship with your body as well as an empowering vehicle. So this past year, my daughter raced Leah Thomas head-to-head on several occasions. And at the start of the season, just as we were made aware that Thomas was going to be competing on the women's team, I think just like what Riley expressed, we thought this was too preposterous to continue, that someone surely would step in, recognize the unfairness, recognize the humiliation, recognize the wrongness of this situation. And no one did. In fact, they continued to double down, and we had statements from the Ivy League condemning anyone who would speak out against it. We had the NCAA saying they stood by Leah Thomas. And what I witnessed is the girls, and this is something that hasn't been discussed in the media at all, but the girls who were involved, by and large, 90+% think this is wrong. Their parents think this is wrong. This is almost unanimous, without exception in conversations I've had face to face. And the schools came back. My daughter in particular would call me and say, I can't believe I'm gonna have to do this. Someone will surely take care of it. The schools came back, pulled all of the girls in the Ivy League at every school into mandatory meetings, told them they were not allowed to talk. They were, the number of things I could go through, they were emotionally blackmailed into being told that if they wouldn't race, or if they would speak up, or if they would complain about changing or having to get undressed next to a man, that they were responsible for the mental health of others, of their trans classmates or athletes. We cannot get to a point in society where we use women as the substantiating force for the mental health of a male. That is not acceptable. These girls were also told that their schools and their universities had taken a position and they had chosen this position. They were told not to speak to media. They were told to be silent. And these meetings, I have the hard copies of these. They were told if they had a problem with getting undressed in a locker room that had male presence or male nudity, that they needed to seek counseling. Yeah, they were told that the problem was theirs. So it was at this point, that I realized just how far we had gone. And that no one, the coaches, the athletic departments, the leagues, were openly accepting public humiliation and abuse of female athletes. They were condoning it. So once these things started happening, my first phone call was to the ACLU. And I asked, what's being done about this? There appears to be a conflict of rights. What do we do about the voices of women? And the response I received was the single most disturbing thing I have heard in my life. And it was that biological sex does not exist. It should not be used in law or in policy. And I left that conversation thinking, we've been erased. How do you defend what you will not acknowledge? How do you defend 51% of the population of the world from discrimination or anything that a woman might face because of her sex? This was the complete antithesis of what I experienced in sports. What I experienced in sports was a belief that as a woman, I could do anything, that I was respected, that my accomplishments were of equal value to society. Not that I was the same as male competitors in male sports, but that I was valued equally. So watching this season unravel, watching my daughter race head-to-head against Leah Thomas, understanding the damage that this did to the female athletes, their belief in themselves. These young women were told by their universities that their voice and their experiences didn't matter, that they did not have the power to change rules. They weren't not invited to share their experiences or their perspectives. So we founded Icons because there was no organization doing that. There is no collective voice for female athletes and their supporters. So our intention is to be that collective voice. And what we are doing about it is multifold. I'm sure we'll get to a few questions later, but we are trying to gather support. We are raising funds. We are organizing groups that will advocate before governing bodies. We are organizing internationally to make sure that female athletes have a voice at the table where decisions and regulations are being made that affect women's sports. And we are trying to work with legislators to protect women's sports, because even if the governing bodies fall on our side, if the political forces are too great, we will not be able to protect our young girls who become our future stars and our future icons in sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, so much for being such a bold warrior. I mean, I think that all female athletes in colleges are blessed to have you, and I can only imagine, sending your child off to college and expecting them to be safe, to hear those words, that biological sex doesn't matter for not just competing, but having her privacy. But thank you so much for all that you do. And I know that we'll look down back in history and think about the work you do with Icons and very much appreciate it. Mr. DeRoche, thank you so much for being here. Your organization, Family Policy Alliance, has been the national leader on passing legislation across the country, and even has seen proposed federal legislation to protect women's sports and Title IX rights as well. Can you give the audience an update on how we are seeing success on this issue across the United States, and what do you see happening in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a privilege to be with you all. And the Family Policy Alliance used to be called Focus Action. It was founded by Dr. James Dobson within Focus on the Family. And we're the hosting organization for Texas Values and 39 other state organizations. And back in 2019, when this really became an issue, as both, as an athlete, a current athlete said, I would have assumed this would be taken care of. And as a parent, this should have been in the traditional things you call a civil liberties union. What are you doing? This is an encroachment of 50 years of civil liberties gains. And they're not there. They're not there. They're not supporting what their missions are. They're not supporting what the teachers, the administrators of the schools thought they would do. We felt we needed to take action. And one of the state organizations that we host in Idaho was a little further ahead. And they said, we will write the legislation, we'll do the model, and we pass this. And everybody said, this doesn't really exist. Why are you doing this? Until it did exist. And it existed all the time. And it's been a long-term plan of the left for a very long time, and I'll explain a little bit about that before I wrap up. But the following year, we had 6 or 7 states look into doing it, and now we are just 3 years later. And I want you to all understand what we're doing here. I came down from Detroit this morning. This is so important, that what the work of Texas Values and what you are all doing, especially here in the church, because this is where the fight back for civil liberties in America always has been. It's been the church. Thank you. When we left England to, flee oppression, it was the church for religious liberty, right? When the civil rights movement actually got traction, well, it was slavery. It was the church that came together to push back on that evil. In the 60s, it was the church that came together, the body of Christ, white, black, Asian, Hispanic together. And we really feel the call right now, because it's not just the policies, but we started advancing the policies from 1 state to 7 or 8 to 20 some, to now it's being introduced and advocated for in over 38 states this year within 3 years. And it's in large measure because of folks just like you that are hearing the voices of the folks here on stage and saying, I'm not going to sit on my couch anymore. I'm going to go out. I'm going to donate my time, talent, treasure. I'm going to march. And I say that specifically because I want to orient you. I don't have the talk of being raised and competing in women's sports, but I'm married to a college tennis athlete all 4 years, and I've raised 3 children, and I have one that colleges from all over America are looking at right now. He's 15 years old. And that exists because of Title IX. And I also had the privilege of working the last 10 years in the justice movement with Chuck Colson before he passed, hired me to lead that. And I learned a lot about civil liberties and about civil rights. And I just want to orient you to why it's important that we raise our voice, why you push your politicians here in Texas to do the next thing. Martin Luther King never got a Nike commercial. You know, the NCAA and Major League Baseball never said, we're with that guy. In fact, his buildings were being firebombed. His phone lines were being wiretapped. Corporations were canceling him. Everybody was telling him to shut up. To this day, last time I checked, I think it was about 6 months ago, I think the NCAA basketball, men's basketball, has 13 African-American men's coaches. These are not people that actually adhere to the values that they say that they adhere to. And they're undermining one of the biggest civil rights movement wins for women in America's history, outside of the right to vote and the constitutional amendment, something that we should all be proud of. Every American, conservative, liberal, centrist, new American, what are you talking about? Our country is great because we actually honor women and we hold their civil rights to be something that we fight for. That's what we fight our wars for. That's the type of liberal democracy that they talk about. All the rest of these countries belittle women. And here we have the American left dehumanizing women. And where I think we are right now in America is right back to where people were in the 60s. I am a man. You are a person, Riley, and you're dehumanized, and our media and our elected officials are getting away with saying that our women athletes are less than human. And that's something that we should all be rising up for. So we at Family Policy Alliance support you. We support Texas values. We can't do it without you supporting them, but we want to help. We're a multi-issue organization, right? So we're here to serve, and we'll serve you as you grow your organization. We'll serve the student athletes as they do it. And God willing, we'll have some civil rights organizations join the cause here in the coming years. But that's what we're doing out there, and we're making huge gains. And we made some gains here in Texas, but I think we'd all like to see the governor here in Texas take a stand that women matter after they turn 18 years old too, that all the way through their life, women's civil rights should be protected.
Absolutely, and I wanted to follow up with you. The Biden administration recently made proposed rule changes that would completely redefine sex. So talk about how this rule affects female athletes and what you see happening in the future in regards to administrative policies that attack women's rights in sports and education.
The revenge of the white man. Now I can talk as an overweight, white, bald guy here. Why is it that every women's gain this year on Jeopardy was a white guy, and a swimmer was a white guy, and the admiral was a white guy, not a woman that worked in that military branch for 20 or 30 years? Again, we're dehumanizing, we're disrespecting, and people know this, right? This is innate. It's not, it doesn't even have to become a policy thing where people say, I better research that and be informed before I vote on it. Everybody knows that this is an affront to the civil liberties of women, and beyond that, it's actually an affront to the people that they know and love dearly in their family. And so that rule change that we took on, the Biden administration, Family Policy Alliance, launched a campaign. Many of you in this room might have supported it because we did also, I've done all sorts of things. I was Speaker of the House in Michigan a long time ago, 2004, and I would see when people would write in about rules, and if you had a couple hundred people write in about a rule, the most boring thing that exists in politics, you knew that the masses were angry with you. And you should stop and take a look at that. Because who has time to write about some Byzantine rule out of the 600,000 pages that the federal government prepares every year? But guess what? 360,000 people. Folks, they have never ever seen anything like that in the history of the American government, protested that rule. To the extent that this is what they're doing, I just want you to know how you were treated is how they treat everybody. It's a universal disdain for Americans and the people that they represent, the people that put them in office. They purged 131,000 of the comments and said they didn't even know where they went. That's the Biden administration. And they think that's going to be the end of it. They think that's going to slow you down. Is that going to slow down anybody in this audience? No. We'll take that 131,000 and we'll make it 310,000 more to replace it, won't we? Because I'll speak it as a guy, my wife, my daughters, my mom, my grandkids, if I'm blessed to have them, this is worth fighting for. This is what our freedoms are about. This is what our Bill of Rights exists for. And our politicians, we know that they don't have a spine. They're not going to get out. Chuck Colson used to tell me that the elected leaders don't lead the culture, they represent the culture as it already is. And so our job is to change the culture. And in this case, we can cut right through where the politicians and the media would have us be in one tribe or the other tribe, and we can come together as a body of Christ, and we can charge this hill together, and we can make a real difference and protect the gains that have been made for the civil rights of women in America and build back on them from where they were.
Very good. Now let's transition the talk to Title IX and what it represents. Now, Kim, Title IX was created to promote women and defend women's rights, but we are seeing those rights to fairness being eroded by biological males stealing trophies, spots on teams, and even athletic scholarships. How can we get the NCAA and other sports organizations to recognize the irony of allowing men to compete in female sports? And what is ICONS doing to address the NCAA and other sports organizations?
Well, it's going to be tricky. The NCAA is completely captured at this point in time. We just were on a webinar day before yesterday where we heard them talk about their transgender policies for competition, and there were some shocking statements made. You were not supposed to use the word woman. They had several statements laid out that were all captured in the language of gender identity. They said they would never do sex testing. They would never use a policy, allow a woman to question or a participant to question whether or not another participant was participating fairly. In a nutshell, what they were saying was there is no policy that they will endorse that allows a guarantee for women to have fair competition. So we have a massive uphill battle with the NCAA at the present time. They are not recognizing that female athletes deserve fairness. They're not recognizing the dignity of their female athletes, and they're not recognizing us as equally valuable to the NCAA relative to males. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need schools who are participating members in the NCAA to stand up for the civil rights and the fair treatment of their female students. And it's going to take courage to do that. But a collective voice of women and parents who are invested in collegiate athletics or just in college or in the dignity of women in the United States need to raise up and demand that this be the case. Legally is probably the most effective way. So the courts are probably the most effective way for us to institute change. In order to utilize the courts, we need brave women, we need brave parents. So we have come up with some strategies to sue the NCAA, to sue schools and institutions, yes, to sue the federal governments and those that are not protecting women as they should be. So those are going to require funds. So right now, as I said, the ACLU has enormous pockets and we don't, but we're going to need the support of the public to give women the power of the purse to go hire the legal backing they need to take this fight where it's going to be won.
Absolutely. And I believe calling out the NCAA, other sports organizations on them basically violating Title IX, which is something that has ruled them forever, takes a lot of courage of female athletes. And Riley, you're definitely one of those courageous warriors. Now that you're speaking out, how should other female athletes get involved in the fight, and why should they speak up?
So it's impossible to speak for everyone, especially, the swimmers that I interacted with, but I can positively, I'm overly confident that I'm speaking for at least 95% of people when I say that this is wrong and unfair, and we all can acknowledge that. I can attest to the tears of the 9th and 17th place finishers who were displaced by one place to be named an All-American, which is a huge honor. And I can attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker rooms and all the grumbles of anger and frustration of these athletes, which is why it is so important to link arms. I think it's crucial to show that we are the majority here. Yet we're catering to, I don't know the exact statistic, but let's say 0.5% of the population, and opposed to the 51% of females that make up the world. It's insane. It's crazy. And so I do want to say, like Kim said, there's so much threatening and intimidation done by these universities and different organizations. You're told you will never get a job. You're told that you'll lose your athletic scholarships. You'll be canceled because we live in this woke cancel culture. But since my speaking out in March, it has been the total opposite. I've received an influx of support tenfold to anything negative, which shows me who the majority is. But the media and these different outlets don't want you to think that you're the majority in thinking how you think. And so if my voice is any consolidation, that the amount of support I've received outweighs any negative comment tenfold. So I think that's crucial to understand. And it's important because, thank you, like they said, I think the left looks at this as something that's progressive. We're moving forward, but what's happening is we're moving back at least 50 years to when Title IX was created. This is not progressive. This is regressive. This is taking us back in time, and I wish, these organizations and different things could see that.
Can I speak to that? Yes, I want to say there is nothing more patriarchal, regressive, or cruel to women than to define us as a thought in a man's head.
Amen.
Wow, we'll have that on a t-shirt next year, I guess, Kim. Well, to close us out, since we're getting ready for the next panel, which I wish this could go on forever, because this is really good to hear people who have actually experienced this injustice firsthand. And Craig, we've appreciated your policy analysis as well. Now, there are obstacles to getting important players like the NCAA, sports governing boards, and even state officials to join in the fight of stopping biological males from competing in female sports. And I'll start with you, Riley. How do you suggest communicating the importance of saving women's sports, and what is something you would like to directly say to these different groups individually?
I think the first thing I would want to understand is I would want to know their rationale of how Leah Thomas went from 500th, 550th, whatever, ranked in the males to a national champion in a year. And if they could give me an answer that even remotely made sense, it would be a conversation, but there's none of that. But I would want them to look me in my face and be able to tell me that I matter and my success in my sport matters. Because at this rate, they cannot do that. It's clearly evident by, like you said, state officials across the country. These organizations, it truly, the only word for it is insanity. It's disheartening as a female athlete to know you've spent your whole life competing and training and sacrificing to get to this point, to be completely offset by a male athlete that they put in that position. And not only are they putting them there, they're celebrating it. This past year, Leah Thomas was also named a nominee for NCAA Woman of the Year, which is the highest honor in all of collegiate athletics for females. Of the 250,000 athletes, I think they nominate about 500. Both Leah Thomas and myself were one of those nominations, but to me, at that point being nominated, I didn't even want it. It devalues it completely. It makes that award meaningless. But all that to say, it's not only is this happening, just kind of discreetly, it's we're celebrating it and we're encouraging it, so.
Same question for you, Craig. How do you suggest communicating the importance of saving women's sports, and what could you say to different groups directly?
This is what I say. We got to use some different words. I'm not criticizing anybody, and I use the word fairness a lot too, but I want us to talk about the virtues and the values here. What Riley suffered was not just unfair, it was an injustice. An injustice is when somebody causes harm to somebody else. Our terms are, in the criminal justice system, it's a criminal, a victim, right? And the community that's affected by it. I'm giving you a little of my Chuck Colson speech now. She was the victim. Your daughter was the victim. The community is women in general that are victimized by the injustice of somebody taking from them. It's an injustice. That's what I would wish and I would hope that we would start saying. This is unequal treatment. This is what this is about in America. The ink didn't dry in Thomas Jefferson's pen saying all men were created equal before our Congress and our leaders tried to find ways to treat different human beings as unequal. We treated African Americans that way, and we still do. We treated women that way, with voting for 70 years, slavery was 69 years, and women are still discriminated against and marginalized and treated by a piece of meat by certain corporations and all these other things. And that fight continues. It's because they get unequal treatment. We're not going to talk about abortion. There's a lot of other good panels, but it's the same thing they're asking for. Well, a human being that hasn't been born, we could treat differently than a human that's been born, right? That's a human yearning that is distant from God. And we need to fight for justice, and we need to fight for equality. So that's what I would ask of you to add to your words, rather than in addition to saying it's unfair and it's ridiculous. And I tease about it. I got some one-liners that I could use. When people say what's really at stake, what's at stake is justice and equality in America, and that's why we all need to rise up for this fight.
And Kim, closing out with you, how do we communicate this issue, and what is something you would directly say to these people?
First, I want to talk to everyone here, if that's okay. Even if sports aren't your thing, sports are the public arena of how we celebrate human achievement physically. And so when we relegate the 51% of the population that is female to unfair treatment or injustice, or not being willing to dignify them with the same opportunities that we give men, we don't just give that message to the athletes, we deliver that message to every single woman. So if we don't recognize that, publicly speaking, that our women are worthy of fair competition, we are telling them they're not worthy of respect. So I think this is a critical fight, just because of the public perception. Step number one, we have to win it in order to have a conversation in the more private arenas where women are being discriminated against because of gender identity. And that means science and healthcare. It means prisons. It means anywhere that women are in the quiet corners. If we can't define what a woman or a girl is, we cannot defend her. So how are we going to fight back, or what are the messages to the governing bodies? The messages to the governing bodies are actually quite simple. When we get a seat at the table, you either believe that women deserve access to fair competition, dignity, and respect, or you don't. It is a yes or no question.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Riley, Craig, and Kim, for this excellent panel. This was an all-star panel. And so we really appreciate the work you're doing on this issue. And if you want more information about this, we have it on our tables outside. But thank you again for coming to share with us today. We really appreciate your work.
Thank you, guys.